James Carter had built his company from the ground up. He had poured years into its success. But as the company grew, something changed. At first, it was subtle. A whisper here, a nervous glance there. Then came the complaints. Employees spoke of ruthless managers, of a toxic culture brewing beneath the surface, of fear replacing innovation. James refused to believe it. He had hired good people, trained them himself, hadn't he? But doubts gnawed at him. The reports he received were polished, sanitized. Reality, he knew, could be something else entirely, so he made a choice. To uncover the truth, he had to see it with his own eyes. James sat in front of the mirror unrecognizable. The transformation was complete. Gray hair, thick glasses, a hunched posture. His usual tailored suit was replaced with a worn-out janitor's uniform.
It was surreal. For years, he had walked into his company's headquarters as the man in charge. Now he would enter as a ghost, just another worker. Would they recognize him? Would they care? There was only one way to find out. Day one, James entered the building, mop in hand. Employees bustled around him, eyes fixed on screens, coffee cups in hand. No one greeted him. It was jarring. As CEO, people had gone out of their way to shake his hand, offer a smile. Now, he was invisible. A receptionist glanced his way, then turned back to her screen. A group of executives walked past, laughing. One bumped into him, didn't even bother to apologize. His stomach tightened. Had it always been like this? By day three, the truth was undeniable. A manager barked orders at an exhausted employee, demanding overtime without pay. A young intern hesitated in the hallway, debating whether to speak up about a mistake. Fear won. She stayed silent. And then, an elderly janitor struggling with a cart of supplies. James watched as employees passed by without a second glance. No one offered help. No one cared. He clenched his fists. This was not the company he had built, but not everyone was cruel. Late one night, while emptying trash bins, James struggled with a heavy bag. Just as he was about to drop it, a voice. "Need a hand?" A young woman, an intern. She lifted the bag with ease, flashing a small smile. No one should have to struggle alone. James stared, caught off guard. A simple act, a kind one, a reminder that not all was lost. Maybe, just maybe, the company could be saved. Then came the night that changed everything. While cleaning the executive offices, James overheard two voices, familiar ones. "Once the board agrees, he's out." James froze. "We finalize the transfers next quarter. By the time he realizes, it'll be too late." Heart pounding, he peeked around the corner. Two top executives, men he had trusted. They weren't just mistreating employees. They were planning to push him out. The next morning, James called an emergency meeting. The room was packed. Employees, managers, executives. Whispers filled the air. Then, the janitor stepped forward and removed his disguise. Gasps, shocked murmurs, disbelief. James took a deep breath. "For the past week, I've walked these halls as one of you. What I saw, some of it inspired me. Some of it broke my heart." Silence, his eyes landed on the two executives in question. "And some of it betrayed me." Tension crackled in the air. James returned to his office, closed the door, exhaled. He pulled out the confidential file he had taken the night before, opened it. What he saw made his blood run cold. Transfers, fake accounts, a paper trail of deception. The betrayal was deeper than he had imagined. His jaw tightened. This wasn't just about fixing office culture anymore. This was war. James Carter had exposed the truth. His disguise was gone. The betrayal laid bare. But his fight was just beginning. The boardroom was a battlefield. Executives stammered, trying to deny the undeniable. Employees whispered, eyes darting between James and the accused. James tossed the confidential file onto the table. "Explain this." Silence. Vincent Hale, a senior board member, cleared his throat. "James, you don't understand?" "Oh, I understand perfectly," James cut in. You planned to push me out, to bleed this company dry while hardworking employees suffered. Gasps rippled through the room. A junior manager shifted uncomfortably. Is this true? Vincent's jaw clenched. You're making a mistake, James. The mistake was trusting you. James turned to his legal team. Freeze all unauthorized transfers. Lock down our accounts. I want a full audit. The traitors had been exposed, but James knew it wasn't over. The company was in chaos. Employees came forward with horror stories. Abuse, fear, intimidation. James listened, took notes, promised change. But that night, as he left the office, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. James hesitated, then answered. A distorted voice. You should have stayed blind, Carter. Then the line went dead. James's grip tightened around his phone. He glanced around the empty parking lot. Was he being watched? The next morning, James arrived at his office to find the door slightly open. On his desk sat a single envelope. He opened it. A photo of his family. A note beneath it. Back down, or lose more than just your company. His heart pounded. This wasn't just business anymore. This was war. That night, James met with his closest allies, employees who believed in the company's original vision. Together, they planned their next move. But outside, in the darkened parking lot, a figure watched from the shadows. A phone call was made. A voice on the other end answered. He's not backing down. A pause, then the cold reply. Then make him. James Carter was no stranger to war, but this time the battlefield wasn't a boardroom. It was his entire life. They had threatened his company. Now they were threatening his family, and James was done playing defense. Security was tightened. The office was swept for bugs. James worked late into the night, building a case against the corrupt executives. Every missing dollar, every falsified report, he compiled it all. But the enemy wasn't backing down. Whispers spread. Employees loyal to Vincent Hale and his conspirators tried to sow doubt. James has lost control, they murmured. Maybe he isn't fit to lead. James knew what they were doing, and he had one move left to play. The next morning, James walked into the conference hall. Cameras flashed. Reporters leaned forward. Thank you all for coming, James said, voice steady. I have something important to share. Behind him, a screen flickered on. A live feed of the financial fraud records. Emails, wire transfers, evidence of the conspiracy against him. The room erupted, gasps, shouts, reporters scrambling to take notes. And in the back of the room, Vincent Hale's face drained of color. James locked eyes with him. This company belongs to the people who built it, not to the ones who seek to destroy it. Cheers erupted from employees watching the broadcast. For the first time in weeks, James felt momentum shifting in his favor. But then, that night, as James drove home, headlights appeared in his rearview mirror. Too close, too fast. A second car pulled up beside him, windows tinted, no plates. James's pulse quickened. He swerved, but the car to his left veered sharply, forcing him toward the highway barrier. Tires screeched. A crash was inevitable. Then, a truck barreled past, its horn blaring. The two cars fell back into the darkness. James pulled over, heart hammering. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. A text message. This is your final warning. Stop, or next time, we won't miss. James sat in his car, staring at the message. His company was at stake. His life was at stake. But he wasn't going to stop. He wasn't just fighting for his business anymore. He was fighting for survival. James Carter had been warned, but warnings meant nothing to a man with nothing to lose. They tried to run him off the road. Now he was going to run them out of his company, permanently. James didn't go home that night. He drove straight to his lawyer's office, locking the doors behind him. He had one mission: take down Vincent Hale before Hale took him down. A knock at the door. James tensed. His lawyer, Rachel, peeked in. You're not going to like this? She slid a folder across the desk. Inside, legal documents signed in his name. Transfers of assets, restructuring plans, everything designed to push him out of his own company. I never signed these, James muttered, flipping through the pages. I know, but someone else did. James clenched his jaw. Only a handful of people had access to these documents. One of them was working for Hale. James needed proof. He needed a confession. That night, he set a trap. He sent a message to his CFO, Daniel, a man he trusted, or at least a man he thought he trusted. James, meet me at the office. Urgent. Bring the restructuring files. Minutes later, a response. Daniel. On my way. James waited in the darkness of his office, hidden behind the door. At exactly 11:47 p.m., the door creaked open. Daniel slipped inside, clutching a folder, but he wasn't alone. Vincent Hale stepped in behind him. James's pulse pounded. He hit record on his phone. I told you, Hale hissed. Carter's getting too close. We have to move now. Daniel hesitated. But if he finds out... Hale grabbed him by the collar. He won't, because after tomorrow, James Carter will be out for good. James stepped forward. Wrong! Hale spun, eyes wide. You... James raised his phone. Got everything I need. James barely made it out of the office before the alarms blared. Security guards rushed in, not his guards, Hale's men. James sprinted for the exit. A guard lunged, grabbing his arm. James drove an elbow into the man's ribs, breaking free. He slammed through the emergency exit, bolting into the parking lot. His car was already surrounded. Headlights flooded the lot. Another vehicle roared forward, coming straight for him. James dived out of the way as the car skidded to a stop. The door flew open. Rachel sat in the driver's seat. Get in! James didn't hesitate. He threw himself into the car as Rachel floored the gas. Bullets shattered the rear window. They were officially being hunted. Rachel swerved onto the highway, gripping the wheel. We need to disappear. Now! James clenched his fists. Number, we go on the attack. Rachel glanced at him. Do you even have a plan? James's eyes burned with determination. I will, by tomorrow. A second car appeared in the rearview mirror, gaining fast. James Carter had always been a strategist, but now the game had changed. This wasn't about business anymore. It was survival, and he was done running. Rachel gripped the wheel, eyes locked on the road. The black SUV in the rearview mirror was gaining fast. They're not letting up, she muttered. What's the plan? James checked the gun Rachel had stashed in the glove compartment. We lead them somewhere we control. Rachel's knuckles whitened. And that would be... James tapped his phone screen. The old Carter warehouse, no cameras, no witnesses, just us and them. Rachel exhaled sharply. That's suicide. James's gaze darkened. Number, that's a trap. The warehouse loomed in the distance, abandoned for years, but James still had access. Rachel swerved into the lot, tires screeching. The SUV followed, skidding to a stop. The doors swung open. 4 men stepped out, guns drawn. James stepped forward, hands raised. Let's talk. Vincent Hale emerged last, smirking. Talk? James. You should have taken the warning. James smirked back. Funny, I was about to say the same thing. He flicked his wrist. From the shadows, floodlights burst on. Dozens of figures emerged, James's loyal security team, armed and ready. Hale's smirk disappeared. Rachel stepped up beside James. Looks like the odds just changed. Hale's men exchanged uneasy glances. The air was thick with tension. James took a step forward. You've lost, Vincent. Surrender now, and maybe you'll see the outside of a prison cell again. Vincent laughed. Low, dangerous. Oh, James, you think I came unprepared? A sharp click echoed through the air. James turned. Rachel. Gun aimed at his chest. His heart stopped. Rachel. She didn't blink. I'm sorry, James, but you were never meant to win. James stared at her, mind racing. Every decision, every plan, and yet he never saw this coming. Vincent chuckled. Checkmate. Betrayal burned worse than any wound. Rachel, the one person James thought he could trust. Now she held a gun to his chest, and Vincent Hale was grinning like the devil himself. James's mind raced. The room was silent except for the distant hum of the city outside. Rachel's hands were steady, no hesitation, no regret. Vincent stepped closer. Did you really think she was loyal to you? James, you've been outplayed from the start. James didn't blink. If you were so sure of that, you wouldn't still be talking. Vincent's smirk faltered, just for a second, and James seized that moment. James moved fast. A sharp twist of his body, a sidestep, and he knocked Rachel's gun arm just as she pulled the trigger. The shot went wide, shattering a window. Chaos exploded. James drove an elbow into Rachel's ribs, sending her staggering. Before she could recover, he grabbed her wrist and twisted, forcing the gun from her grasp. Vincent's men lunged forward. James fired 2 shots. One man dropped, clutching his leg. The others hesitated, just long enough. James spun, grabbed Rachel by the arm, and pulled her toward the nearest exit. Move! She resisted. James, now! For a second, something flashed in her eyes. Regret, fear, then she ran. Bullets shattered crates and ricocheted off metal beams as James and Rachel sprinted through the warehouse. Vincent's voice echoed behind them. You won't make it out, Carter! James didn't stop, didn't look back. A loading bay door loomed ahead, their only shot. Rachel reached it first, slamming the button. Nothing. The door was locked. James whirled. Find cover! Rachel ducked behind a stack of barrels. James dropped low, reloading the stolen gun as Vincent's men closed in. One chance, one last stand. Then, a deafening boom. The warehouse shook. A massive explosion tore through the far wall, sending flames and debris flying. Through the smoke, headlights appeared. A black SUV, engine roaring. The driver's door flew open. Daniel, James's CFO. Get in! Now! James grabbed Rachel's arm, dragging her toward the SUV. But as they ran, Rachel stumbled. James turned, just in time to see Vincent emerging from the smoke, gun raised. A single gunshot rang out. Rachel gasped, her body jerking as she fell. James caught her before she hit the ground. Her eyes met his, full of something he couldn't quite read. Vincent smirked, lowering the smoking gun. Checkmate, again. Rachel's body went limp in James's arms. Blood seeped through her shirt, pooling onto the cold concrete floor. Vincent Hale lowered his gun, smirking. Bleeding out already? Shame. I expected more of a fight. James felt his pulse thunder in his ears. He had seconds, maybe less, to decide. And he wasn't letting Rachel die here. James, move! Daniel's voice cut through the chaos. Vincent's men closed in, their weapons raised. James tightened his grip on Rachel and sprinted for the SUV. Bullets kicked up dust and sparks as they fired. He ducked, shielding Rachel's body with his own. Daniel floored the gas the second James slammed the door shut. The SUV roared forward, smashing through a stack of crates. The tires screeched as they peeled out of the warehouse. She's hit, James shouted. Get me something to stop the bleeding. Daniel tossed him a first aid kit. This isn't over, man. They'll follow us. James pressed a wad of gauze against Rachel's wound. She winced, barely conscious. Stay with me, he murmured. You hear me, Rachel? You stay with me. Her fingers weakly curled around his wrist. I didn't have a choice. James swallowed hard. Save your strength. We're getting you out of this. Daniel swerved onto the main road, tires screeching. Where to? They'll be tracking us. James's mind worked fast. Safe house, north side. We lay low and figure out our next move. Daniel nodded, punching the gas. Behind them, a second set of headlights appeared. Vincent's SUVs. They're on us, Daniel shouted. James grabbed a gun from the glove compartment, rolling down the window. Keep it steady. The first SUV gained fast. A figure leaned out, gun drawn. James fired first. The shot shattered the windshield. The driver swerved, tires screeching. The SUV slammed into a concrete divider, flipping onto its side. One down, Daniel yelled. 2 more still coming. James clenched his jaw. They weren't making it to the safe house at this rate. Change of plans, he said. We lose them. Now. James's fingers flew over his phone, sending a quick message. A reply came instantly. Understood. Location secured. Daniel, take the next left. Head to the docks. Daniel's eyes widened. The docks? That's a dead end. James glanced at Rachel. Her breathing was shallow. Not if we're ready for them. Vincent's SUVs stayed close, headlights flashing in their mirrors. Daniel gritted his teeth and turned sharply. I hope you know what you're doing. James exhaled. So did he. They sped toward the darkened docks. Empty warehouses lined the road, shadows stretching long under flickering streetlights. James checked his gun. One clip left. Daniel, when we stop, get Rachel inside. I'll handle the rest. Daniel hesitated. And if this doesn't work? James met his gaze. It has to. Ahead, the docks loomed. Behind them, Vincent's SUVs closed in. Then as they reached the final stretch, the road exploded. A fireball erupted behind them, engulfing Vincent's lead car. James's reinforcements had arrived. Vincent's second SUV skidded to a stop, but it wasn't retreating. The doors swung open, and Vincent Hale stepped out, unscathed, grinning. James's stomach tightened. Vincent knew this was coming. Vincent Hale stood in the wreckage, untouched by the flames, unbothered, unshaken. He had expected this. James tightened his grip on his gun, heart pounding. The explosion was meant to turn the tide. But Vincent, he was still standing, grinning like he had already won. Smoke curled through the air. The sounds of creaking metal and distant sirens filled the silence. Vincent took a step forward, boots crunching over debris. Impressive, James, but predictable. James didn't lower his weapon. Then why did you walk into it? Vincent chuckled. Because I knew how it would end. Before James could react, the ground beneath them shook. A second explosion, not from his reinforcements, from Vincent's. The dockside trembled as a nearby warehouse burst into flames. The shock wave sent James stumbling back, his ears ringing. Through the haze, Vincent's voice carried. You really thought you were the only one setting traps? Daniel's SUV screeched to a halt. James, we gotta move. James turned, eyes darting between Vincent and the burning wreckage behind him. Then, gunfire erupted. Vincent's men emerged from the shadows, automatic rifles aimed at the SUV. Muzzle flashes lit up the night. James sprinted toward the vehicle, diving behind cover as bullets tore through the pavement. Rachel groaned in the back seat, barely conscious. James! James cursed. They had to get out now. Daniel, take the wheel! James shouted, firing back at Vincent's men. Daniel didn't hesitate. He jumped into the driver's seat and floored it. Tires screeched. The SUV fishtailed before launching forward, bullets chasing them down the dock's narrow roads. Vincent stood watching, hands in his pockets, still smiling. James checked Rachel's wound. The bleeding had slowed, but she was getting weaker. He turned to Daniel. Safe house is compromised. We need a new plan. Daniel's jaw clenched. There's an abandoned airstrip a few miles from here. No cameras, no heat. We can regroup there. James nodded. Do it. Then his phone buzzed. A single message flashed on the screen. Unknown number. You're running out of time. She's not who you think she is. James's stomach turned. He glanced at Rachel, her pale face the way she clutched her side in pain. Then back at the message. His grip tightened around the phone. What if Vincent wasn't the only one playing him? James is running out of options. But what if Rachel has been hiding something all along? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Stay tuned.